Personal growth. The story of Adam's escape, family instability. Welcome to Silent Wars. In today's video, we're diving into a powerful story about family dynamics and the emotional challenges of dealing with family instability. Adam's journey is one many can relate to: facing judgment, feeling overlooked, and struggling to break free from a toxic environment. If you've ever felt trapped or unsupported, you'll definitely want to hear his story. Before we get started, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Silent Wars for more stories that can inspire and empower you. Adam had always been the kind of person who believed in the traditional trajectory of success: study hard, get a good job, climb the ladder. At 28, he had checked off most of the boxes. After graduating with a degree in computer science, he landed a solid job at a mid-sized tech firm. It wasn't Silicon Valley money, but it was enough to pay the bills, live comfortably, and enjoy a sense of independence that most of his peers were still striving for. He had a stable job, an apartment in the city, and a vision of where his career and personal life would take him. But then, in 2020, everything changed. Like many others, Adam found himself facing the harsh realities of the pandemic. His company, like many others, downsized in an effort to weather the storm. Adam, one of the younger and less established employees, was let go first. The news hit hard, but Adam had always been optimistic. He told himself it would be temporary. He would find a new job, secure another opportunity, and be back on his feet in no time. However, as the months dragged on, the interviews came and went with no offers, and his savings began to run dry. With no other options, Adam made the difficult decision to move back in with his parents. At first, it seemed like a small, short-term inconvenience. He'd have a roof over his head while he figured things out, he thought. But reality set in quickly. What had once been a refuge from the world now felt like a suffocating cage. His parents' house, which had once felt like a familiar, comfortable space, now felt more like a reminder of everything he had lost. Adam's mom, Diane, made sure he knew exactly how inconvenient his presence was. Every meal he ate, every light switch he flipped, every moment he was home seemed to weigh heavily on her. "This isn't a hotel," she would say. Adam tried to brush it off, but the constant passive-aggressive comments wore him down. It wasn't just the inconvenience of living there, it was the tone, the looks, the subtle jabs. His mother would frequently remind him how his younger brother, Jordan, was out there living his best life, working in finance, and thriving in a high-rise downtown apartment. What stung the most wasn't the guilt or the shame, but the feeling of being invisible. No matter how much he worked, no matter how much he tried to make things easier for his parents, it never seemed to be enough. His achievements were ignored, his efforts minimized. All the while, Jordan was treated like a golden child, effortlessly basking in their praise. Adam had once believed that family was a place of unconditional support. But in the small, cramped guest room where he spent most of his days, he began to realize that his family's support had always been conditional, dependent on his success, his usefulness, and, ultimately, his ability to live up to their expectations. This suffocating cycle of guilt, resentment, and family tension was not just a temporary setback, it was shaping Adam's understanding of himself and his future. His dream job, his sense of independence, and even his relationship with his family were all unraveling. What he once thought would be a temporary situation was quickly becoming a deep, emotional struggle that would take everything he had to overcome. The tension between Adam and his family, especially with his mother, Diane, was almost palpable. While he did everything he could to make his presence at home as unobtrusive as possible, cooking, cleaning, fixing things around the house, nothing seemed to satisfy her. His every move felt like an inconvenience, and no matter how much he tried to contribute, the passive-aggressive comments kept coming. "Why don't you have a real job yet?" his mom would ask, as if his unemployment was something he enjoyed. The sting of those words hit harder every time. Adam was working, freelancing when he could, and applying for jobs every single day, but his efforts went unnoticed. His mother seemed to only see him as a failure. The house that was once a sanctuary now felt like a prison of expectation. Meanwhile, his younger brother Jordan lived a life that seemed worlds apart from Adam's. At 24, Jordan had a successful career in finance, a high-rise apartment downtown, and everything his parents could ever ask for. He was constantly praised, even for the smallest of achievements. When Jordan walked into the room, it was like the sun broke through the clouds. Their mother's voice would lift in excitement. "Look at you, you look great. Are you working out?" she would say, showering him with compliments. It was a sharp contrast to the cold indifference Adam had grown used to. Adam, who had achieved so much on his own, sat in the background, unnoticed and unappreciated. It was as if he had become invisible to his family. Even when Adam had his own victories, like getting a perfect score on his SATs or landing freelance work for local businesses, his accomplishments barely registered. His mom's only response was a distracted glance, followed by her focusing on something related to Lily, the fragile, always ill sister who seemed to consume everyone's attention. Adam's achievements were not worthy of praise, at least not in his parents' eyes. They were overshadowed by Lily's needs and Jordan's accomplishments. As the months dragged on, Adam found himself sinking deeper into the role of the background servant, helping with chores, fixing things, managing family issues without ever being acknowledged. No one seemed to care about what he did, only about how his absence would affect the family's routines. He cooked dinner, he cleaned, and he fixed the Wi-Fi, yet he was treated like an invisible force, someone who existed only to serve. His father, Mark, hardly spoke to him, and when he did, it was usually only about the logistics of household chores or the latest problem with Lily's health. The constant comparison to Jordan and the constant disregard for Adam's hard work was eroding his sense of self-worth. He had spent his entire life working for approval, but all that effort seemed meaningless in a house where only one son could ever truly be celebrated. Living in the shadows of his family, Adam began to wonder whether he would ever be seen for who he truly was, or if he was doomed to remain the silent servant, invisible and unnoticed, for the rest of his life. One evening, during what should have been just another family dinner, things took a turn for the worse. Adam sat at the table, trying to ignore the simmering tension that had been building in his home for weeks. His mother, Diane, couldn't resist making yet another sarcastic remark about his job search. "Have you even tried applying for real jobs lately?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. Adam had told her multiple times about the interviews he'd had that week, but it didn't matter. The words hung in the air like a weight, adding to the frustration that had been building for months. But it wasn't just her words. Jordan, his younger brother, who was always quick to jump in with a comment, added, "You know, at some point it stops being bad luck and starts being bad choices." The words sliced through Adam, each one more painful than the last. He didn't respond. He couldn't. Instead, Adam quietly pushed his chair back and walked into the kitchen. The laughter and chatter from the dining room seemed distant, almost foreign to him. As he grabbed his plate and stood alone in the kitchen, the reality of the situation hit him like a ton of bricks. He had always been the one to help, the one to be there when needed, but no matter how hard he tried, he was still the failure in their eyes. That night, something in Adam snapped. He sat down in the kitchen, eating alone in silence as the conversations continued without him in the dining room. The laughter felt cruel, like a slap to the face. It wasn't the first time he had been treated like this, but it was the first time he felt it so acutely. His parents had been telling him for months to get his life together, to find a real job, to stop freelancing. But none of his efforts, his hard work, or his achievements had ever been acknowledged. Instead, all he felt was the weight of his mother's disdain, the heavy burden of being seen as a failure. Then came the moment that pushed Adam to the edge. His mom, still in the dining room, called out to him, demanding that he start paying rent immediately. The word leech was thrown at him like an accusation, something that Adam had heard far too often from his mother. That word, leech, stung more than anything else. It wasn't just a comment, it was an indictment of everything he had tried to do to make his way in the world. His mom didn't see him as a person trying his best. She saw him as an unwanted burden. The weight of betrayal hit Adam hard. In that moment, Adam knew it was time. He packed his things in silence, each movement feeling like a final goodbye. When he left that house, it wasn't just the physical departure, it was an emotional one. The sense of betrayal echoed in his chest as he walked out the door. His family had made him feel like he was nothing more than a burden, a failure, and he couldn't take it anymore. For the first time in a long time, Adam walked away. Not just from the house, but from a life that had kept him stuck in the shadows, always invisible, never truly seen. After leaving his parents' house, Adam found himself in a whirlwind of uncertainty. For weeks, he bounced from couch to couch, staying with friends and even an ex-girlfriend. Each night he wondered what his next move would be, where he would go from here. It was a difficult time. He had no home of his own, no sense of stability, and worst of all, no real direction. Yet, amid this uncertainty, something unexpected began to stir within him. A fire, one that had been buried under years of neglect and disappointment, suddenly flared to life. Adam knew he had to prove something to himself, if no one else. He wasn't a failure. He wasn't the leech his mother had called him. With determination, Adam threw himself into freelance work. He didn't have the luxury of waiting around for a traditional job to come his way. Instead, he started building websites for local businesses, helping them get online and adapt to a rapidly changing world. It wasn't glamorous work, and it didn't come with the prestige of a big tech company, but it was his work. Each project, no matter how small, fueled him. He spent long hours designing, coding, and troubleshooting, learning new skills as he went. The work was tough, and the pay was inconsistent, but Adam knew this was his chance to build something of his own. This time, he was in control. As the weeks passed, his hard work started to pay off. Slowly but surely, Adam began to build a reputation. Clients were impressed with his skills, and word of mouth spread. His portfolio grew, and with it, his confidence. Adam was no longer the guy stuck in his parents' basement. He was a freelancer, a small business owner carving his own path. His persistence and dedication to his craft caught the attention of someone important, a recruiter. One day, while working late on a website redesign, Adam received a message on LinkedIn. It was a recruiter from a startup looking for a remote developer. The job wasn't the dream role at a Silicon Valley firm he had once imagined, but it was something he could sink his teeth into. It was enough to get his life back on track: stable income, benefits, and the freedom to work from anywhere. Adam didn't hesitate. He went through the interview process and was offered the position not long after. The job wasn't a financial windfall, but it represented something far more valuable: stability and the freedom to move forward. For the first time in a long time, Adam felt like he had control over his life again. He could breathe, knowing that he had created something out of nothing. The uncertainty that had plagued him for so long started to fade, replaced by a sense of pride and accomplishment. From couch surfing to freelancing, Adam had proven to himself that he could thrive on his own terms. This wasn't the end of his journey, but the beginning of a new chapter, one where he had the confidence to take on whatever challenges came his way. After landing a new job and finally regaining control of his life, Adam felt a sense of freedom he hadn't experienced in years. He rented a small, modest studio apartment, a space that was entirely his own. No more judgments, no more passive-aggressive comments from his mom, and no more feeling like an unwanted guest in his own home. For the first time, Adam felt like he was truly living his life on his own terms. It wasn't much, but it was everything to him. With his new job, a steady income, and his own place, Adam began to rebuild. He focused on his freelance projects, took on more responsibilities at his new job, and started saving. It wasn't about proving anything to his family anymore. It was about building something real for himself. Yet, just weeks into his new life, Adam received a call from his dad. "Why did the bank freeze our account?" his father asked, his voice tense and filled with confusion. At first, Adam had no idea what his dad was talking about. But then the memory hit him like a ton of bricks. Months ago, when he had helped his parents set up their online banking, they had asked for his assistance to make everything more accessible for them. He had added himself as a secondary administrator, not to spend money, but just in case there were issues, or if something went wrong with their online banking. Adam had forgotten about this, but now it seemed like that access had become their last lifeline. It hit Adam hard. Here he was, trying to carve out his own future, and his parents were still calling on him to fix their problems. They were back to seeing him as the person they could rely on for everything, someone to help with tech issues, sort out financial problems, and step in whenever they needed assistance. He had no intention of returning to that role. Adam had been clear with his parents the last time they asked for his help. He had set boundaries, and he wasn't about to let them blur the lines again. With a mix of frustration and satisfaction, Adam decided it was time to turn the tables. Instead of offering to help them again, Adam texted back simply, "Ask the leech." The shockwaves from those 3 words were immediate. For the first time, Adam had leverage. He wasn't the person scrambling to fix their problems anymore. He wasn't the one they could call on for their tech issues and personal favors. He was no longer the leech in their eyes. He was someone who had successfully built a life away from their control, and he wasn't about to go back. The silence that followed was deafening. Adam knew that his parents would be furious, but in that moment, he didn't care. They had humiliated him for years, making him feel small and insignificant, and now they needed him. But this time, Adam wasn't playing the role they had cast him in. He had the freedom to choose, and for once, he was choosing himself. The real power shift had begun. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming his dignity, standing up for himself, and proving that he didn't need anyone to validate his worth. Adam wasn't their leech anymore. He was someone who had fought for his independence, and no one, especially not his family, was going to take that away from him. For years, Adam had been the silent fixer in his family, the one who handled all the tech issues, reset passwords, dealt with online bills, and took on the responsibility of keeping everything running smoothly. Despite his constant support, he had never received any acknowledgement or appreciation from his family. They took his help for granted, seeing him only as the go-to person when things went wrong. It was always assumed that he would handle the technical aspects of life for them, without ever being truly recognized for the work he put in. The lack of gratitude had begun to erode Adam's sense of self-worth. But now, things had changed. Adam had finally found his footing, built his own life, and gained the independence he had long yearned for. He had secured a job that allowed him to regain control over his future, and he was living in a small apartment, his own space, free from the toxic dynamics of his parents' house. However, when his father called asking for his help with their frozen bank account, it was a reminder that the family still saw him as the go-to person for their problems. Adam could feel the familiar tug of obligation, an automatic reflex to jump in and fix things. But this time, something in him snapped. He was no longer the helpless young adult living under their roof. He was an independent man, and he refused to be the tech support for his family any longer. He was tired of being used and dismissed. Adam decided to set a clear boundary. He wasn't going to help them fix their problems unless they acknowledged him not just as a source of help, but as a person with needs and feelings. He wanted an apology, an honest, heartfelt apology for the years of disrespect, for treating him like a failure while ignoring his contributions. He wasn't interested in their money, nor did he want anything from them in return. He simply wanted respect. The confrontation was uncomfortable. Adam's father, who had always been distant and passive, wasn't used to his son standing up for himself. He hesitated, trying to avoid the tension, but Adam wasn't going to let them off the hook this time. He wasn't just looking for a sorry thrown out casually. He wanted them to understand the emotional toll their treatment had taken on him. It was about recognizing his worth, not just fixing their problems. When Adam made his demand for respect and acknowledgement, it left his parents in an awkward silence. They weren't prepared for this. For years, Adam had been the one to fix things without question, and now he was turning the tables. The uncomfortable truth hung in the air. They had relied on him without ever truly appreciating him. Adam wasn't going to let this moment pass. He wasn't asking for revenge or even for their approval. He was simply demanding what every person deserves: respect. For the first time, Adam felt empowered. He had leverage, and he wasn't going to let them walk all over him anymore. The uncomfortable silence spoke volumes, but Adam didn't flinch. He had stood his ground, and in doing so, he had taken the first step toward reclaiming his life, free from the emotional manipulation and expectations of his family. For Adam, this wasn't just about a simple standoff. It was about learning to value himself, to prioritize his own needs, and to never allow anyone to take advantage of his kindness again. The fallout from Adam's decision to set boundaries wasn't what he had expected, but it was exactly what he needed. After he demanded an apology and respect from his parents, his mother sent him an email, a cold, emotionless message. She apologized, but it lacked sincerity, and Adam could tell it was more of a formality than a genuine reflection of her feelings. It was the kind of apology that didn't come with the acknowledgement he was looking for, just a quick fix to ease the discomfort. In that moment, Adam realized something crucial. His mother's apology wasn't about him, it was about her. She didn't apologize for the years of neglect or for treating him as an invisible servant. She apologized because it was easier than confronting the real issue. Adam's father, on the other hand, eventually came around. He called Adam after days of silence, asking for help with their frozen bank account. But instead of the usual, "Please fix this for us," he said something that hit Adam in a way he hadn't expected. "We need you," his dad admitted. It wasn't the kind of admission Adam had hoped for, and it wasn't one that made him feel needed or appreciated for who he was. It was an admission that they had only ever valued him for what he could do for them. He wasn't a son to them. He was a tool, a source of technical support, and a safety net when things went wrong. That moment of revelation struck Adam with a force he hadn't prepared for. For years, he had worked hard to earn his family's approval, always sacrificing his own needs and desires to be the person they needed. But now, in the face of their desperation, Adam realized that their love and attention had always been conditional, based solely on his usefulness. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was a revelation that set him free. Adam no longer needed their approval to feel validated. He had already validated himself by standing up for what he deserved. The tension from the confrontation lingered in the family, and Adam felt it too. It wasn't just about the broken bank account or the unpaid bills, it was about the years of emotional neglect and the damage caused by their disregard for his well-being. But as the emotional weight began to lift, Adam felt a sense of empowerment. He had finally reclaimed control over his life. The guilt, resentment, and frustration that had built up over the years began to dissipate, and he saw himself in a new light. He had stood up to his family, set boundaries, and taken charge of his future. For the first time, Adam realized that his happiness didn't depend on them. He had made his own way, found his own success, and built a life that was his own. No longer shackled by the need to please his parents, Adam was free to move forward on his own terms. The family drama that had followed him for so long was no longer his burden to carry. And in that freedom, Adam found peace. He had taken control, and that was something no one could take away from him. Adam's journey towards self-empowerment took a definitive turn after his confrontation with his parents. The weeks that followed his emotional standoff weren't filled with dramatic moments or grand gestures. Instead, they were defined by quiet decisions that symbolized his growth. The first of those decisions was to remove himself completely from his parents' financial accounts. For years, Adam had been the one managing their banking, troubleshooting tech issues, and handling their administrative tasks, always in the background, always quietly holding everything together. But now, he drew a firm line in the sand. He no longer wanted to be the invisible figure who only existed to fix things for others. He was done being their tech support, their financial safety net. This time, he was prioritizing himself, and it was the most liberating choice he had ever made. The next step was finding his own space, a small studio apartment in Toronto. It wasn't luxurious. The space was modest, with just enough room for him to breathe and begin again. But for Adam, it was perfect. It was his space, completely his. Every square foot of that apartment represented a hard-earned victory. He could decorate it however he wanted, organize it to suit his lifestyle, and, most importantly, he didn't have to answer to anyone. It was a far cry from the suffocating atmosphere he'd left behind at his parents' house, where he had been constantly reminded of his failures, treated as a burden, and made to feel unworthy of respect. For the first time in years, Adam didn't feel like a leech. That word, which had haunted him for so long, no longer had a hold on him. He wasn't relying on anyone. He was standing on his own 2 feet. The guilt that had once gnawed at him, the guilt of not meeting his family's expectations, of not living up to their arbitrary standards, began to melt away. He had worked hard to get where he was. He had built a career from the ground up, freelancing, pushing through rejection, and eventually landing a job that offered him the freedom he so desperately sought. As the days passed in his new apartment, Adam started to feel a sense of peace that had been absent for a long time. The silence from his parents, while initially uncomfortable, wasn't a punishment, it was freedom. There were no more passive-aggressive comments or well-meaning criticisms. No more guilt trips about helping out or being a failure. His parents' silence was, in a way, a reflection of his independence, a confirmation that he no longer needed their approval or validation. The weight of his parents' expectations no longer dictated his life. Adam had learned the hard way that family doesn't always understand your journey, and sometimes, the people closest to you can be the ones who hold you back. But in that silence, Adam found his true self. He found a strength he never knew he had, a sense of purpose and identity that wasn't defined by his family's limitations. Now, Adam was free to move forward without guilt, without fear, and without the need to explain himself to anyone. He had earned his place, and the future was his to shape. For the first time in a long time, Adam felt like he was finally living his own life, not the life others had planned for him. And in that freedom, he found the peace he had been searching for. As time passed, Adam's decision to stand his ground and cut ties with his family started to take on a deeper meaning. Despite the growing distance between him and his parents, they continued to reach out. They sent messages on social media, left voicemails, and even tried to guilt him into helping them once more. Their attempts were subtle at first, masked in casual concern, but it was clear what they were really asking for: help, a return to the old dynamic, where Adam was the one who quietly fixed things behind the scenes. But Adam wasn't swayed. He had already made peace with his decision, knowing deep down that he wasn't looking for their approval anymore. He had built a life of his own, one that was no longer defined by his parents' expectations or their skewed perceptions of him. The life he was creating in his studio apartment in Toronto was finally his. It was free from the weight of their judgments, and he was beginning to truly enjoy it. There were no more passive-aggressive comments, no more guilt trips, and no more feelings of being unappreciated. For the first time in his life, Adam realized that he didn't need his family's validation to feel good about himself. The victory wasn't simply about escaping their house or getting away from the daily criticisms. It wasn't about distancing himself physically or emotionally from the toxic environment that had defined his past. It was about reclaiming his own sense of self-worth. He had spent years feeling like a failure, listening to their criticisms, and working endlessly to gain their approval, only to be told he was never enough. But now, Adam understood that he was enough. He had stopped letting his family define him. He no longer saw himself as the failure they had labeled him. Instead, he saw someone who had fought through adversity, worked tirelessly to rebuild his life, and built a future on his own terms. Every step he had taken in his freelance work, every job he had secured, and every decision he made to move forward had been on his own merit. He wasn't the person they had once made him out to be. He had proven that to himself, and to them, without needing their approval. While the calls and messages from his parents continued, they no longer carried the same weight. Adam had learned that true independence wasn't just about leaving his parents' house, it was about leaving behind the emotional baggage that came with it. He didn't need their help, and he didn't need their validation. He had found something far more powerful: self-respect, and the freedom to live his life on his own terms. The realization was profound. Adam's journey had shown him that true family wasn't about the people who shared his blood. It was about the people who supported him, respected him, and celebrated his achievements. And for the first time, Adam felt that he was surrounded by people who truly cared about him, not for what he could do for them, but for who he was. He had reclaimed his independence and his identity, and in doing so, he had found his true sense of belonging. In Toronto, Adam finally began to flourish in a way he never thought possible. The weight of his family's expectations and toxic dynamics began to fade into the background as he embraced his new life. He found a job that truly ignited his passion, a position that allowed him to grow professionally and personally. It wasn't just about having a job that paid the bills anymore. Adam had found something meaningful, something that made him excited to get up every morning. The people he met in Toronto were a breath of fresh air. Unlike the family who had always treated him like a failure, Adam surrounded himself with individuals who valued him for who he was, not just for what he could do for them. He built a network of friends and colleagues who respected his boundaries, saw his worth, and appreciated the effort he put into his work. For the first time in his life, he felt truly seen. The drama with his parents, once a major source of emotional strain, became nothing more than a distant memory. Their attempts to reinsert themselves into his life were no longer the driving force behind his decisions. Adam knew they still didn't fully understand the gravity of his choices, nor did they ever acknowledge the personal sacrifices he made to create the life he had. But he no longer needed their understanding or approval. He had come to terms with the fact that he could not change the past, and that the best thing he could do for himself was to move forward. Adam had broken free from the toxic family dynamics that had shaped much of his early life. The constant comparison to his brother, the belittling remarks, and the feeling of never being good enough had all been part of a painful past that no longer held him captive. By cutting ties and standing up for himself, he had discovered something incredibly powerful: his true strength and independence. It wasn't just about physical distance or emotional boundaries, it was about reclaiming his sense of self-worth. As Adam settled into his new life, he realized that the decision to move to Toronto was more than just a geographical change. It was a personal transformation. He had learned how to trust himself, how to build a life on his own terms, and most importantly, how to stand firm in his own identity. The lessons he had learned, painful as they were, had shaped him into a stronger, more resilient person. Now, with a job he loved, a support system that valued him, and a renewed sense of independence, Adam understood that he had made the right decision. The family he had once hoped would accept him for who he was had never done so. But in building his life away from them, Adam had found not only his independence, but his true sense of belonging. He was no longer defined by their judgments, and that was the most freeing realization of all. One of the most profound lessons in Adam's journey is the importance of self-worth and the power of setting boundaries. Throughout his life, Adam struggled with being undervalued by his family, particularly by his mother and brother, who only saw him for what he could provide, rather than acknowledging his efforts or dreams. This pattern of exploitation led him to a breaking point where he realized that true fulfillment comes not from external validation, but from within. The courage to stand up for himself, remove himself from toxic dynamics, and create a life on his own terms is a powerful reminder for anyone, especially in later years, that it's never too late to reclaim one's peace, dignity, and independence. For older adults, this lesson emphasizes the importance of self-respect and the need to protect one's emotional well-being. Just as Adam had to distance himself from a family that only saw his usefulness, we too must learn to set healthy boundaries with those around us. No matter the stage of life, it is essential to remember that our value is not defined by how much we give to others, but by how much we honor and nurture ourselves. The act of creating space for our own growth and happiness, free from guilt or obligation, is a vital step toward finding true peace and contentment in life. Thank you so much for watching. We hope Adam's story resonated with you and encouraged you to stand up for yourself and set healthy boundaries in your life. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to Silent Wars for more content that empowers and motivates. We appreciate your support and look forward to seeing you in our next video.